Alright, I'm going to start off where we left off on the last video, talking about founder's effect. So when we're looking at founder's effect, it's talking about a population that has become isolated. And when a new organism is produced, that's great, and it helps with diversity. However, when they are isolated, they have difficulty bringing in the differentiation that you want in your alleles. So what happens in those cases is you have something like polydactyl, where they have extra fingers and toes, such as the Amish in Pennsylvania, because they ended up being in their own small community, not breeding outside that community, just like the blue people we talked about earlier, and they end up inheriting those odd traits because they're breeding within their community. And that is what happens with your founder's effect. Non-random mating, that's talking about me choosing my mate, and in the case of the birds, you have your beautiful males that have to show off and do all these dances and all these crazy things to be beautiful to a female. And, for example, this gorgeous bird here on the right, what happens is they try to select the best traits. So they're looking for the best dancer, the best plumage, which is their feathers, and being able to, like this beautiful spray of plumage there. Best muscle tone, most powerful, the loudest, whatever may be the case that they're looking for, the female is going to pick the best mate. So the guys have to show off for her. And, like, for example, there's some videos out there about the bird of paradise. It's the coolest thing to watch. You should watch it if you get a chance. But he goes through this whole dance for like 5-10 minutes trying to attract this mate, and in the end she may just fly away, and he just wasted all that time and energy, and it's got to be exhausting. But that's really what has to happen with this non-random mating. They're selecting it for a purpose, to be the most benefited characteristics for evolutionary advancement. So here is the review of mechanisms of evolution. We talked about mutation. Let's talk about the DNA sequence changing. This is our dinosaur project right here, talking about changing the DNA. And then natural selection is what's happening. You're having survival of the fittest. So the DNA is mutating in order to create a better species of that organism. So gene flow, movement of alleles to new population, you want that because it causes that variability, that diversification that we want to see in populations. Genetic drift, that's disaster leads to reduced genetic diversity. If we have that, remember the bottleneck effect, then we reduce our ability to have these diverse populations. And then non-random mating, like we said, is where the female selects, or the male, and most of the time in wild, it's the female choosing the best mate, and they are doing that to create a traits that advance their the organism that they are. Speciation is talking about when two populations do not interbreed because they're so different. So you have different types of apes and monkeys and things. Those are related in some fashion in the past. But at some point they diversified so much that they can no longer mate together. So originally they were able to be a species where they were able to have fertile offspring, but now that they're so diverse in their population and they're so far away from the original, many of those can't breed together, which would be speciation. Okay, geographical isolation is talking about being located in different places, so it's impossible for you to mate because you're not even in the same place. So you have where the land is split, like we said, Pangea was where we all started from and diverged from there and had species develop in other places because the land split up into different parts and we can't get together. That's specific to animal reproduction. We obviously could take a plane and go places. St. Patrick's means together speciation. Speciation occurs without a physical barrier due to the changes in numbers of chromosomes. So it's showing us one here. These two here blending together to create this breed of wheat. They believe that it may be due to the errors made during meiosis, producing diploid gametes instead of haploid. We talked about this. This is fatal in humans, but not uncommon in plants. So doubling the chromosomes isn't a problem, but in humans that would be a problem. So you again have that diversity and that change in and organisms. Macroevolution, we talked about this already. This is where you have large-scale evolution, where it happens over time, big changes, and it's going to be such things like mass extinction, like we saw with the dinosaurs, and we see that through looking at fossil records. Divergent evolution is adaptive radiation, so you're talking about adapting to the environment. Convergent evolution is where things come together and evolve. You also have the micro evolution, which is small changes over time. Speciation rates, you have gradual, where it changes slowly over time. And punctuated, you're talking about, here's punctuated, where you have an initial organism that splits into variations, right? Gradual will be slow changes over time, but just breaking off. Punctuated would be they're making specific points of changes relatively quickly, with long periods of genetic equilibrium between them. So that means that nothing changes. So you're going to see them like break off in a quick event rather than a gradual change like when we were talking about. The gradual is where it's going to go slow. Here's where it's going to be disrupted and move into different organisms or different variation of the same species. Okay, just talked about that. Adaptation. Things have to adapt or die. That's survival of the fittest. So they either adapt, like in this case where he grows the white fur in a place where there is a lot of snow, but his skin is black to help him retain the heat. Fossils are things that are left behind by organisms, so we use them for dating, to date how old organisms are. That's what this is radioactive carbon dating. So it calculates the amount of carbon left inside of the fossil, and they can date that by seeing how much is left, looking at the half-lives of that carbon and determining how old organisms are. How did the Earth form? The theory is the Big Bang Theory. Not everyone follows along with that, as far as even in the science community. It is the dominant scientific theory, but there are a lot of people who don't necessarily buy it. So when we talk about the age of the Earth, we're talking about it being approximately 4.6 billion years old. And that we can tell by the rocks that we've looked at, radioactive dating the rocks. First life on Earth was bacteria, prokaryotes, if you remember that word for them, single-celled organisms. They lived about 2.5 billion years ago. Cyanobacteria would be marine life. That's the blue-green algae that you hear about sometimes. Released oxygen during photosynthesis changes the atmosphere of the Earth, and a lot of times this is where it becomes toxic for plants and animals inside of the water. So they usually have trouble whenever they have that problem. Here is your geographic timeline. So you're going to see the period. These should look familiar to you, where they talk about Jurassic period or Cambrian period. You're talking about the periods in time, and these are going to be the eras. Right? Millions of years. We're going to see our label here. Then if you come over here, it's going to tell you what existed at that time. So Quaternary, you're going to see evolution of humans. We're talking about the let's see, let's start back here. So we're looking at the arrows following down, giving you the timeline. So we were saying about 1.8 million years ago, we had the evolution of humans. Then we come down here to 650 million years ago, is for skeletal remains, right? So if I asked you, when did the first mammal, what period was the first mammal found? We would be looking here up this side here to look for that topic. First mammal is here. We'd say this is the period. Triassic. And Mesozoic is the era. So you have to be able to read this table looking at it this way. These are the years. These are the eras. This is the periods. And these are the events. Now usually you're going to look at this scale, geographic timeline, and look at it because somebody's asking you to answer a question, just like I asked you one. Classification. This is getting down to nitty-gritty. We're at the end. How old are you? Has anything changed in the last 14 to 15 years? Body, family, learning? Well, of course it has. So we keep track of that. What we do is we have a taxonomy. It's a system to organize things on Earth. So it was developed by Linnaeus. And what he did was he said, you know, there has to be organization to be able to put things into categories. So it's not perfect, but it works for the fact that it helps us organize things. So here's how we organize it. Greatest number of organisms are the broad, so this has the most organisms, going down to the most specific, least organisms being more specific. So we start with domain, which is talking about a big umbrella of organisms, and then you go to kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. This should all sound very familiar. Pretty sure you probably had to memorize it in lower grades. So we're going to look here. So when we look at the taxa, which is the levels, we're looking at the domain, the most organized. Species, the least organized, we just mentioned that. Each level includes one above it, so we're going to look here. Taxonomic classification. We can look at kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, subfamily, genus, and species. If we look over here at man, these are going to be what the words that go with it are. So the kingdom is Animalia, and then you just key Chordata, right? Phyla is Chordata, class is Mammalia, order is Primates, family is Hominidae, subfamily same, genus Homo, species Sapiens. So you can go through here and see the different organisms, and again you'll see why we're closely related to these different primates, because we're in the same. Oh, genus is where we split off, right? So that's why we are so closely related. 98% match. Does the taxonomy, remember this is taxonomy here, this is too, taxonomy is a system of organization, organizing things from the most broad to the more specific, like species. Here's us looking at all of that organized down to the species, right? Broad to specific. Does taxonomy relate to the tree of life? Absolutely. 8.7 million known species today. We add them all the time. So what happens is they believe that we came from a common ancestor. And then as we grow, as we diversify, we turn into something completely different. So if you go up this tree, you're going to see there's a man. And that's because we're all linked in one way or another. No different than the food web, right? Doesn't it seem weird? So anyway, over here on the right is another table to show you how it's organized. You'll see the same things we just talked about. It's going to give you, let's see if we can do this here. So if you can read them, these are the species examined. And over here you're going to see the organisms, right? How they're all linked together. And then how do we name organisms? So Linnaeus, like I said, came up with an idea how to organize them, and what he did was he gave them all names. So that's called binomial nomenclature, bi meaning two, and it's a Latin word, so it gives them a scientific name. Genus, species. Genus is always capitalized. Species is not capitalized. So that would help you know what you're looking for. Remember, these are the same: kingdom, phyla, class, order, family, genus, and species. This is what it is for a turtle. This, I can't see what that is. I have no idea what that is. Ooh! I lost it. And then this last one, a butterfly. So, you may be given something like this. You're just going to, most of the information will be given to you. So, we'll see that here in a second. A cladogram is telling you to show you the evolutionary tree. So, you would, if it's, so for example, as we branch up here, we're going to see it breaks off here, 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 here. The ones that are branching off are different diversified organisms. So they would, these here are all related in a sense that they all come from that common ancestor. But all of these are related to one another. These are related to one another, right? They all have a common ancestor. If we look here, this here is telling us from here to here are the vertebrate organisms. So anything that falls in this area would be vertebrae. They'd have a vertebrae. Then as you go up, these to here are going to have vertebrae and bony skeleton. Then as you go here, you keep adding because they're all related, right? So when you branch off, it's going to be anything here is going to have hair, right? We know alligators and crocodiles and birds don't have hair. Birds have feathers, right? So that's how you read a cladogram. So let's move on. A dichotomous key. You probably have experienced this as well. You're going to be asked a question usually, so you'll see here the question. You're trying to figure out which organism you have. So you read here, you decide whether or not your organism has that, and then if it doesn't, you read the next one, which one is better fit. Then it'll tell you which question to go to after that, and then so on and so forth. And by the time you're done, it's got you down to the point you know which organism you have. And that is it. End of our evolution conversation.